You would have thought that the world had gone mad if somebody had said to you, even 10 years ago, oh, did you know there's going to be a court case? Oh, what's it about? What, bank robbery or something? No, no. Libel? No, no, no. They're going to define what a woman is. Really? Get out of here. What do you mean they're going to do? They need a court case to define what a woman is? And that's what happened today. The court said, look, it's not a victory for one side or the other, or shouldn't be seen in that kind of way. But they did conclude, and there's no doubt about this, this was the ruling, transgender women are not legally women under UK law. The ruling defines women based on biological sex, not gender identity or self-ID. And of course, this follows the battle between For Women's Scotland and the Scottish Government, with campaigners calling it a victory for common sense. In a moment, we'll be speaking to Peter Tatchell. Bev Jackson's going to be with us too, but let's have a reminder of Lord Hodge this morning delivering the verdict.
The central question on this appeal is the meaning of the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010. Do those terms refer to biological women or biological sex? Or is a woman to be interpreted as extending to a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate? By that I mean a person born male who now possesses a gender recognition certificate amending her gender to female. The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
Let's first speak with Bev Jackson, co-founder of the LGB Alliance. Afternoon to you, Bev. Your reaction to this ruling this morning?
Yeah, lovely to see you, Ian, and thanks for having me on. And obviously, we're just incredibly pleased with this decision. And I really want to pay tribute to For Women Scotland, who have fought and fought and fought for years. They're all volunteers. They've just been fighting because it's so important for the women of Scotland, for the women of the UK. And I think that this will reverberate around the world. But we intervened, LGB Alliance and a number of lesbian groups, because of the rights of lesbians, which are constantly overlooked. And I think you'll find that all the articles about this coming up, they ignored the fact of lesbian rights. But it was really important when we saw in the court these judges grappling with the absurdity that a straight man, a heterosexual man who does not possess a gender recognition certificate is a heterosexual man, but once he's got that piece of paper, he becomes a lesbian. And you could see the judges thinking, this makes no sense. And that's why throughout their ruling, they talk about a coherent interpretation of the law. The law has to make sense. And sexual orientation, whether you're attracted to men or to women, is about biology. It's about biological sex. Of course it is. It isn't. Nobody's attracted to a piece of paper. It was a complete nonsense. And although I understand the Supreme Court saying that it isn't a victory, it is, of course, a victory for those whose rights have been ignored. This is not about trans rights. It's about women's rights and it's about lesbian rights, which is a sort of double of women's rights, isn't it? It's about women defining themselves and who we're attracted to. And
it did seem, I went through this at the beginning, and I talked, you and I, Bev, have spoken many times over the years on this issue, but what's to me still confusing, this was not an issue up until about half an hour ago, it seems. You know, I've done this job for a couple of decades. You've worked in your field of campaigning and profile for a long, long time too. It never came up. It just never came up. It only really came up, I sense, was when not trans people who decide to live their life under a different name and a different sex from the one they were born with, who weren't harming anybody, weren't advocating any special treatment, etc. It seemed to be this kind of gender evangelism that threw it up. As you rightly say, you know, a bloke with a beard suddenly says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a lesbian. Now, sorry, no, that ain't happening, mate. And it was things like that and various, you know, fairly high-profile people sometimes saying you can be whatever you want to be. And if you've got a beard and a penis and want to call yourself a woman, you have the right to do so, and the law of the land and all institutions should change to accommodate your identity.
Yes, well, I mean, you've got Peter Tatchell coming on in a minute, and he's going to talk about the rights of people who call themselves the opposite sex. But the fact is that lesbians' rights have been ignored throughout. And that is why Kate Harris and I set up LGB Alliance. Really, it was the main reason in 2019. We tried to get Stonewall to understand that when they changed from talking about the rights of gays and lesbians, same sex, to talking about the rights of people who think they're the opposite sex, say same gender, they were making a nonsense of sexual orientation. Sexual orientation isn't about gender, someone who thinks they're the opposite sex. That's not what sexual orientation is. It's completely mad. And in fact, if you ask heterosexual people, if if a man who's heterosexual falls for a woman because it's a man but who calls themselves a woman, they will think it's ridiculous because straight people don't have to deal with that. It's lesbians mostly who've had to deal with this, and we're really sick and tired of it. And that is why I feel really, I think you can hear it in my voice. I feel really emotional about this. We have been fighting this for so long. We have been ignored. We have been invisible. And it's really a tremendous, it's above all, it's a relief to see that the Supreme Court understood. And they said that for lesbians to have to accept men who call themselves lesbians into their spaces and into their activities is an assault on their autonomy and dignity. And it was such a relief to read those words, I can't tell you.
I tell you, and it got to really weird sort of areas, didn't it? I think, again, we talked about this before. If I decided that I was a woman, but I wasn't a straight woman, I was a lesbian, and you decided, Bev, that you would never date me, then that would make you a wicked transphobe, despite the fact that my anatomical makeup remains that of a male. You would be transphobic for not you wouldn't have to date me, but for not recognising that I was dateable. That would make you the bad person.
From how difficult it is for you to even express that it is not, it's incoherent, isn't it? It makes no sense. And yet that is what Stonewall has been telling us. That is what, ever since 2015, when they changed from same sex to same gender, that is what Stonewall has been telling us. And that is what all the LGBTQIA+ organizations around the world have been telling us. And that's why I really hope that this is a victory for what is sometimes called Turf Island, sometimes affectionately and sometimes as an insult. I'm really pleased that news media around the world, in France and in America, around the world, are taking note of this, because this needs to be rowed back everywhere, not just in the UK, and all tribute to For Women Scotland for fighting this fight and allowing us to intervene on behalf of lesbian rights.
Bev, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on. Bev Jackson, co-founder of the LGB Alliance. Let's talk to Peter Tatchell, human rights activist, director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Peter, good afternoon to you. Well, I think you've probably been listening to what Bev said. I'm going to take a bit of a punt here that there's quite a lot you would disagree with. Good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon, Ian, and listeners. First of all, let me start by saying that biological sex is real, and so is gender identity. They're two different things. They're not the same, but they're both equally valid. And in a democratic liberal society, we have to try and find a way of reconciling them to avoid some of the instances that Bev has spoken about. As far as I'm aware, there's never been any court judgment in this country to compel a lesbian to have sex with a trans woman or to date a trans woman. That is, and I'm sure there have been a few examples where a trans woman has tried to date a lesbian, but of course, a lesbian is perfectly within her rights to refuse to date a trans woman. But
it doesn't make you, I think the point there with Bev was that it doesn't make you a wicked transphobe if you say, well, I'm never ever going to, I'm never going to date a trans woman. That's not going to happen. And I can say that. I can say that without being a transphobic son of a gun, can't I?
Absolutely. I have never supported those who say that lesbians must date trans women. That is completely wrong.
Okay.
Lesbians have every right to refuse to date a person of any kind. No one should be forced to date anyone.
True.
And I think this is a bit of a mountain out of a molehill, because, as I say, the courts have never ruled that lesbians must date trans women, and all the lesbians I know when they've been approached by trans women, they've politely said, no, thank you. And the trans woman has accepted that and said, okay. So it's a bit of a mountain out of a molehill. But on the wider issue, this judgment, my understanding is that it will not prevent organizations from choosing to accept trans women if they wish to. So, for example, I have a friend who works for a women's centre in the north of England. For the last, I think, 7 years now, by the agreement of the staff and the users, they have accepted trans women and they've never had a problem. It's a happy centre where everybody is welcome and it's trans inclusive. The law won't force them to deny trans women, providing no one objects. But of course, if someone does object, then the centre told me they would have to change their policy.
And there's clearly always going to be people with different views. You know, we're a healthy democracy, Peter, and, you know, not everybody is always on the same page with every sinew of a judgment. But broadly speaking, something like a woman's refuse, there would be, you might imagine, you know, a lot of people would say, hang on, this is for women, not for blokes. And of course, this judgment does very much say that a trans woman is not a woman.
But
therefore a bloke.
It also says now that trans men must use women's toilets. And that's going to cause incredible distress to women when they go to a toilet thinking it's for them and suddenly a trans man walks in. Imagine the shock, discomfort and fear that some of those women might feel.
Yeah, I genuinely asked that. Yeah, I genuinely asked that question because I was never, you know, I've never been able to work that out. And just to go over what I said a little earlier, Peter, you know, I've done this job for a long time, as you know, and this was never ever a debate. It was never a discussion. It wasn't on the agenda. It suddenly appeared out of nowhere, it seems. And I've often wondered where or how it came around. And it seems to me that, yes, of course, there are trans people who will have felt discriminated against over the years, but this has been a political thing, hasn't it? This hasn't really come from people who genuinely feel, I'm in the wrong body, I need to live my life differently. This has come from, you know, the identitarian Marxist left, if you like, who've gone in hard on this. You can be whoever you want to be. You want to call yourself, if you've got a penis and a beard and you want to call yourself a woman, you've got every right to do that, and the rest of the world should bend over backwards to accommodate it.
No, that's not true or fair, Ian. The call for trans inclusion has come from trans people themselves who've been marginalised and discriminated against, and that is wrong. This judgment, of course, also says that trans people will continue to be protected under the Equality Act against discrimination, but it will allow, in certain circumstances, same-sex, women-only spaces to be preserved. Now, it's a difficult issue. The other issue, of course, is when it comes to biology isn't simple. A trans woman who undertakes hormone treatment and gender reassignment will have many of the attributes of a biological woman. The hormone treatment will actually change their physiology.
But she'll never be a biological woman, though, will she?
It will change their, reduce their muscle mass, reduce their strength.
Would it change their chromosomes, Peter?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It won't change their chromosomes.
So they remain a man.
Biology is not a simply, black and white, cut and dried issue. It is complex, and unfortunately, we're in a situation where this judgment has ruled in one direction, and that will mean for many trans people a great deal of anxiety. I think and hope that most organizations will respond in a measured way, and will, perhaps we can find new solutions. Now, for example, on the issue of toilets, if we have more gender neutral toilets, like you have at a pop concert or a festival, the toilets there, they're not male and female, they're gender neutral. Well, more institutions could have gender neutral toilets, and that might solve that problem. And then in terms of trans participation or involvement or attendance or ability to access women-only spaces, perhaps some organizations might now make new trans inclusive spaces available for trans people. You know,
and that would be
separate is not equal, separate is not desirable, but that may be a solution.
Okay, well, people have their own views on where you draw a line, as in things like participating in sport, etc. But that maybe is an argument for another day. Meantime, Peter, thank you. Peter Tatchell, he is, of course, human rights activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation.